Hello and welcome. I'm Roger Ream, and this is the Liberty and Leadership Podcast, a conversation with TFAS alumni who are making a real impact in politics, public policy, government, business, philanthropy, law, and the media. Today on Liberty and Leadership, I'm joined by Desiree Koetzle, an alum of TFAS's Business and Government Affairs program and the Chief of Staff to Representative Pete Stauber of Minnesota's 8th District. Desiree has been with Representative Stauber's office for 14 years, starting as a legislative assistant in 2009. We're going to discuss her long career in government, her thoughts on the incoming Congress and the recent elections, and how her time at TFAS has shaped it. Desiree, thanks so much for taking the time to join me. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Well, good morning, Roger, and thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here with you this morning, and Merry Christmas, where I'm just up here in the winter wonderland of northern Minnesota. Not quite as beautiful as northern Wisconsin or anywhere in Wisconsin, as you know, but happy to be with you this morning.
Well, thank you. Thank you. As Desiree knows, I grew up in Wisconsin, a bit across the border in the Milwaukee area, but had opportunities to go to northern Wisconsin for summer camp and see some of Minnesota as I was growing up, and it's a beautiful state and great people. I might begin by asking you, since we both grew up in what I call the upper Midwest, do you think there is such a thing as Midwestern values that kind of define those of us from the Midwest, that maybe differentiates us from other parts of the country?
Well, absolutely. I do. And as we were just talking, it's, well below zero right now. We have a different kind of grit as well. You got to just make it and survive. And I think we have some of the hardest working, most honest and humble people in the country and on the planet. I think we just have great people up here. So the work ethic, especially of the upper Midwest, is something that is well recognized throughout the country. And I'm just thrilled to be a native of northern Minnesota.
You grew up in northeast Minnesota. You went to St. Cloud University. And sometime while you were there, I guess you discovered the Fund for American Studies and our summer program in Washington. How did you discover us? How did it come about that you came to our program?
Yeah, so it was actually 20 years ago this summer that I attended the Fund for American Studies, and I did the Business and Government Affairs or Government Relations program. I can't believe it's already been 20 years, but how I first found out about it was I was active in the student government. At that time, I think I had just ran for student body vice president. And my really good friend at the time was the student body president. We ran together, and he had done the program, I think, the summer of 2001. And then I did it the following summer. So I heard about it through another classmate of mine at St. Cloud State University. And the fund changed my life and in the course of my career and the direction because of that summer at TFAS.
What do you remember much of the courses you took, or your internship, or perhaps your classmates and your experience?
Absolutely. So I had the courses that we took, and that time we were still at Georgetown University, lived on the campus there. It was fantastic. It was the first real entree I'd had to Washington, D.C. My parents are blue collar workers. I was the first person to go to college in my entire extended family. So the opportunity that it allowed me to explore Washington, D.C. and live in Georgetown and just be alongside amazing classmates that I still have as friends today was an incredible experience. And I really am just thankful for what the fund did for me, not only that summer, but then also helped me launch my career. The classes that I took were parts that I remember the most are just the dialogue that we had about just government today, the interconnections between government affairs, the lobbying world, and what that means for every American. There's lobbying that touches every single American today, and most people don't actually realize that. But people in Washington are advocates for virtually every industry and every important issue that Americans are facing today. And so the courses that I remember the most were based on just learning more about that. We had amazing guest speakers and lecturers. And in fact, I just want to note, one of them was Juanita Dugan, and she was just an incredible person. I remember her distinctly, and she and I kept in touch throughout the years. And my heart is broken at the news of her passing. And in the sudden passing of her. It's just heartbreaking. She was an incredible person and gave so much to TFAS and to individual students like myself. But I remember that fondly, and that was a huge thing that opened my eyes to the world of Washington and the opportunities there.
Yes, Juanita Dugan was serving on our board of trustees when she died suddenly a few weeks ago, and it came as just really shocking news to get that word. She died far too young and was an influence on a lot of people, and had been president of the National Federation of Independent Business and the Paper Products, Forestry and Paper Products Association, and others. So yeah, that's a big loss, and I appreciate you mentioning that. I by the way, spoke just the other day recorded a podcast with Professor Mike Collins, who you might have had for the Power and Values course that summer. He taught that for many years. It's a course that is a little different than a typical college course, I think, but it's one a lot of students refer to. And you mentioned the word lobbying, and one of the reasons we started that program in 1990 is that lobbying does have a bad connotation. It's viewed as something that's corrupt, and we like to try to point out to students that lobbying is the way you redress grievances. It's in the Constitution that citizens have a right to do that. It's a way to get information to congressmen. Most lobbyists are honest and are trying to present a side to an issue that maybe people on congressional staffs haven't been familiar with. But is that your, could you talk a minute about this idea? Because you've worked in the private sector and in the public sector, but about what lobbying really is all about?
My first job was thanks to TFAS. I had come in and I had been looking for a job. I had moved back to Washington, D.C. a year after I had done the program. And I had been looking and looking. I couldn't find a job actually in Minnesota. And for me, it was just, I had asked, the staff over at TFAS, and they helped me get a job at a lobbying law firm. And so that was my first entree into actually working in the lobbying profession. I was a junior lobbyist, and I did that for 3 years. And TFAS was actually the reason why I got the job. It was a contact that one of the staff at TFAS had at the time, and I got a job there at a lobbying law firm. It was amazing. And I think that the biggest thing that people need to learn about lobbying is that like I said, it touches every facet of various Americans, whether you're young, older. Every industry has a lobbyist, and it's really important actually to make sure that we have advocates talking to members of Congress, so that we are making sure that Congress is putting forth legislation that makes sense. I mean, truly, lobbyists and the folks downtown and throughout the country, because not every lobbyist is in Washington, are the experts that Congress and staff lean on to make sure that we're putting forward smart policy that is going to make a difference or change things that are not great in this country. And so we rely on lobbyists for their expertise. And I think it's just not only a noble profession. Not every lobbyist is great, but not every, we can name various folks in various professions that are not always great, but the vast majority of them are just fantastic people that are, like I said, experts in their field, and we rely on greatly. And I had lobbied actually for 5 years. I went to a lobbying law firm after TFAS helped me get my first job. And then I went to Koch Industries for 2 years before I then pivoted to the Capitol Hill. And the other thing I would like to say is that I kind of did that backwards. Roger, that most people actually go to Capitol Hill, get Capitol Hill experience, understand being a staff, and then they actually go downtown and lobby. I kind of did it backwards. And I will tell you that a lot of folks on the Hill say, it's really helpful that you had the knowledge from downtown to make a difference on the Hill. I have an understanding of the dynamics of what it means to be an advocate. And I brought that brought it as a skill set that I still use today in my current job as chief of staff for my hometown congressman. So it's a skill set that a lot of people don't have on the Hill. And I think that it's something that people should consider more.
Yeah, that is a different type of path. Now, so you worked in the private sector. More recently, you've been working in the Congress. You also spent some time in Thailand, as I recall. What was that experience like? Fascinating to have spent years there.
it was fascinating. And so right before, actually during our wedding rehearsal, my husband got a job offer to move to Thailand. Literally took the phone call when the pastor was waiting at the end of the aisle during our rehearsal. So
And you
that was
still
funny.
said I do. You
But
still said I do.
still said I do. That's right. And so it was really fun because he at the time, my husband at the time was working for Chevron at their headquarters out in California. I was working for then Congressman Erik Paulsen was my first member that I worked for, who was from Minnesota 3 and represented that district for 10 years. And so I didn't really want to leave my job. I loved my job and I didn't want to move to California, but I think it was an answer to prayer that we ended up being able to just go and start afresh in Bangkok. And my husband actually was a lobbyist for Chevron. And it brought to light actually a new lens to look at lobbying, actually, because he ran government affairs for Southeast Asia for all their operations there. So and I worked at the American Chamber of Commerce there, and they had obviously advocacy issues before with American companies that have a presence in Southeast Asia and obviously in Bangkok. And that was really exciting. But my husband was able to do that. And that was really fun to watch the skill set of lobbying and how you kind of explain that to and teach a team in various other countries. We have a much more sophisticated lobbying apparatus here in the United States than most, if not any other country in the world. And it was fun to watch local professionals learn from that and do things differently sometimes, but also, be successful in local Southeast Asia countries. So that was a lot of fun.
Great experience. You came back to Washington and then went back to the Hill?
Yep. And so I have two young boys and they were both born in Thailand. And so I just wanted to enjoy my time with them when they were young. And then when my current boss was running, both of my boys were school aged. And so I thought it was time and I was ready to go back full time. And Congressman Stauber, I first met him when he was just running for the seat. And he knew that I was from his district, just north of where he's from in Duluth. And I said, I would love to work for you. And I've been his chief of staff for the last 4 years, actually. And it's been an amazing ride. He's a wonderful person, works hard for our district every day. And we've built a great team and we've gotten a lot of great things done. Even in the minority, we've been able to be very successful. And I'm looking forward to January 3rd when the Republicans take over and hopefully we can have even more successes than we've had over the last 4 years. So
let's talk a little bit about that. You work for a Republican, and the Republicans have now captured control of the House by a thin margin. How will that change things for your office?
Well, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people, your average person in the U.S. probably doesn't understand like how the dynamic changes on that front. I do think that our office will be a lot busier in general. Like you said, it's a tight margin for Republicans. So the idea of passing major pieces of legislation may prove itself to be difficult. That being said, I think the American people want us to be doing more. We did flip the House, albeit by only 5 seats. And I think that we're going to be just basically making sure that we're trying to get as much done as possible and sending it over to the Senate and see what they're willing and able to do over there. I do think that for our particular office, my boss will be chairing the Energy and Minerals Subcommittee. So all the federal leases for both onshore and offshore for oil and gas development in this country falls under the jurisdiction of that. And right now, as you know, energy prices are just killing our economy and folks throughout the country, and especially here in northern Minnesota, where we heat our homes with a lot of natural gas. And so just making sure that we're promoting policies and working with this administration to make sure that we're putting forward more oil and gas leases. It's really important for us. And then mining is a huge issue for us in northern Minnesota that my boss is now, that's the reason why he's chairing that subcommittee. We have 98% of our America's nickel or the world's nickel, 88% of our copper, and a third of our nickel here. And it's really important that we are accessing America's minerals instead of getting it from other countries like Russia and China or Chinese run mines in other countries. So this is something that we work really hard to promote. It's a great opportunity for Minnesota and the country to make sure we're bringing back and securing ourselves in the national security front by using our minerals. So super wonky in policy why is there, but that's the stuff that we're hoping to work on in this next Congress.
Yeah. Why do you think Republicans underperformed at least expectations in the midterms? Do you have a sense of that? Usually, I think the expectation was possibly taking over the Senate, but certainly a larger margin in the House. Was it a failure to kind of nationalize the election or articulate issues effectively?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons, but I do think the polling was accurate for the first time in a couple of cycles, actually. And the biggest thing for me is that I've observed and that we've talked about with, I've talked about with other chiefs of staff and other folks on the political side is that, the Democrats have gotten really good at collecting ballots. And even though Republicans tend to want to vote on day of or maybe do some early voting, I think voter registration needs to be a huge priority for Republicans. The Democrats have really gotten good at this. And even though you and I may or may not agree that, election day is now election 6 weeks or stuff like that, we as a party actually need to be going and making sure that we're registering voters and then getting their ballots where obviously above board and legally in each state. But this is something that we need to look into more. I really think that the polling was accurate. I think it was supposed to be as a bigger wave than we were anticipating. That being said, it is because we failed to go and make sure those voters were actually registered and getting their ballots in. Florida actually did a great job of this. And I think that we can be replicating that throughout the country with the various state laws that are in place. So I think the next cycle, we have a huge opportunity to learn from 2022 and do much, much better in many other places than we did in this cycle. And I'm looking forward to 2024. I think we're going to do much better and learn from this lesson. So I do think also the very touchy subjects of, like abortion and things like that. I think that Democrats were effective on that front, despite the economy being as poor as it is. But that's something that Republicans can learn from as well. So
one issue that seems to loom over everything but isn't getting the attention that I think it deserves is just the massive increase in government spending. It started when COVID started and the Trump administration was in. It continued certainly under the first 2 years now of the Biden administration. And it's being done, through a tremendous amount of government borrowing and the monetization of debt by the Fed. It's led to inflation. Do you see that Congress is in any way serious about trying to do something about the serious financial problems that, have been building for decades, really, with unfunded liabilities and government debt? How do we get Congress to, act on those issues?
I think we can. I do think that the 5-seat majority is making things very complicated for Republicans on the House side, and obviously we did not win the Senate, which is very unfortunate for if we're going to talk about debt and the serious situation that this country is in on that front. I agree. I think it's very dire, and I think that we should be focusing on this a lot more. I mean, we're supposed to be voting, as you know, on this huge 1.7, almost $2 trillion omnibus. And, when I first came to DC and met you, just over 20 years ago, $1 trillion bill was unheard of. I mean, the fact that we're just churning out trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of spending in a matter of just months over and over again is terrifying. And it's not what the American people need. It's not what your grandsons need. And it's something that we need to stop and really think about how we're doing business in Washington. So I think, the omnibus, obviously, as of right now, is being threatened by a Title 42 provision by Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He obviously wants to make sure that we continue to extend that. So the latest on the news this morning is that the omnibus, we'll see what happens on that. But we do need to get control of this, because what our country's facing right now is not good, and it's only going to get worse if we don't get it under control. So
yeah, and when this podcast airs, I assume our audience will know what happened with the omnibus, but it is interesting, and we'll see if anything positive came out of the Congress. I noticed when Congressman Stauber named you as his chief of staff, he cited your work ethic and your leadership skills. And on these podcasts, I like talking about leadership. Do you think leadership is something that is just you're born with it or you aren't, or can young people learn to be leaders as they look at the examples of other people who lead or try to learn the skills of leadership?
That's a great question. I think some people are just born innate leaders. I think the best ones probably just are from their gut, just are that way. That being said, I think leadership skills can be developed and learned over time. And it's a combination of those two that really make the most sound leaders that people want to follow. Um, I really, this is stuff that we're working on actually in our own office. We've had a person come in who's been a coach for CEOs and executives. It's a new program actually that the House is bringing forward to make sure that members of Congress kind of can be coached on their vision of service and what do we want to make sure that their staff want to do in 3 to 5 years, and how can we make sure that the office is running at a capacity that is serving their constituents, but also making sure that they have ability to get things done. And I really think that, if you look at members of Congress as the most privileged people, frankly, I think, that have ever been able to walk the planet, serving our great country, but they don't always have the background of leadership skill development. Yes, they're a member of Congress, but they might not, have all the skills that they're using yet. And I really think that this program that we're using right now is helping, my boss develop his leadership skills and my staff. And that's something that I'm excited for the next Congress that even more members are going to participate in. And the other thing to kind of consider is just, even though somebody might be a member of Congress or a chief of staff, we can always continue to develop those skills and build on that, and be really thinking outside the box of what else can we be doing as leaders in this country, because our country needs it right now.
Just to get a better understanding of congressional office, how many employees are there in a typical congressional office, and how does it break down between staff in Washington and staff in the district?
On the House side, obviously, we have smaller offices than the Senate. I have about 8 folks in our DC office and about 8 folks in our district office. My boss's district spans for hundreds of miles. It's actually larger than the state of West Virginia. And so we have 4 different district offices that our staff there work at, and then a main flagship office near his home in Hermantown, just outside of Duluth. And then also on the campaign side, we do have campaign staff as well. So managing about anywhere between 20 and 25 people with various duties for each of them is a challenge, but it's also a lot of fun, making sure that everybody's performing as well as they can. And like I said, trying to deliver results for our district.
So yeah, I should point out Congressman Stauber's district goes from Duluth and Lake Superior in the east across the top of Minnesota. Then does it go down as far as north of Minneapolis, St. Paul?
Yes, exactly. So actually, after redistricting, our district got bigger because we had population loss, whereas the Twin Cities suburbs districts got smaller because they gained population. And so as a result, we have more travel and more windshield time. But yes, it goes from the northern border up to Canada, all the way to the exurbs of the Twin Cities suburbs, out west into, obviously we're touching Congressman Fishbach's districts. We have some agriculture out there. And then we also have all along the North Shore and Lake Superior. So it's a vast and beautiful, I think the most beautiful district in Minnesota. The geography, the lakes, and the natural resources that we have here to offer are just unsurpassed by any other congressional district, in my opinion. It's gorgeous up here.
And like I guess it's true, the typical congressman, like Representative Stauber, does he head back to the district almost every weekend when Congress is in session? He's heading back.
He does, and Roger, I think this is one of the hardest parts of serving in Congress. He's got 4 children, and he just adopted a little one. He and his wife did, and then they're fostering another one and hoping to adopt that one. So they have 6 kiddos, and just very noble of them to take on fostering and adopting in addition to their own 4 children. But being a member, like I said, not only one of the most privileged positions on the planet, but also one of the most busy, and you have a lot of commitments to make. And so members generally do go home, depending on where their district is or their family situation, every weekend. But if you're from California or Alaska or Hawaii, that's not an option for you. And so some folks do move their families to Washington. And in a lot of ways, I can understand why people would want to do that. and 50 years ago, that was very common practice to have your family there in Washington with you, and that's where you got the work done. And I think that's why members actually, were able to work more together, because they spent time together. They did weekends together, activities together, dined together. Their families knew each other, and I think that's part of the brokenness in Washington that we have today. And I do think that we can change that, but it's a big part of why we don't have that anymore, because we just all go home on the weekends, which is very good to go back to your district and be with your constituents. But on the same token, it comes at a price where relationships in Washington and the exhaustion on the member can really be a lot.
Yeah, and even less than you said 150 years ago, I think, but even 60, 70 years ago, because I remember Congressman Walter Judd from Minnesota. He was one of our founders at the Fund for American Studies and involved for many years. And his daughter was telling me about the fact that when she grew up in Washington, her father was a congressman. They belonged to clubs and went to schools with other members and their children. They'd be together on the weekends. And you're right, it leads to at least stronger personal ties between members across the aisle. And our chairman likes to say, you used to be able to walk the halls of Congress at night and you'd hear the sound of ice in glasses as congressmen were socializing, chips if they were playing poker, and conversation taking place across party lines. And that's lost if members are having to head out of town on Thursday night and come in Monday night for the voting that takes place. So we've got to find out some other ways to try to build those ties, I guess, in the modern age of easier travel than getting on a train to get back to the district.
That's right. And I do think COVID actually made a difference too. Proxy voting has been going on on the House side for over 2 years. And so these members, a lot of them, haven't even been in Washington for some of them since they swore in Speaker Pelosi. So again, when the Republicans take over, I do think that will change as well, and making sure that, we're physically there together, whether we like it or not, and hopefully talking to each other more and getting more things done.
As a chief of staff, and I'm sure it's true for most offices, I imagine most staff, of course, live in Washington, D.C., but you travel back to the district on district business, not only because I know you're from the district, but are you on the plane a lot heading back to Minnesota?
My two boys, who are now 9-11, have been able to go back here to our cabin where I'm at right now and spend summer here at the lake on Lake Vermilion in northern Minnesota, which has been wonderful because I want them to feel like they're from here. And they can be near family and cousins and just be outside and enjoy the great outdoors. And so, yes, I do fly back and forth a lot, and not every member is able to have a chief of staff who is from the district. And I'm just so thankful that I can work for my hometown member. It makes such a difference, just the relationships of the folks that I grew up with and know, and my family's here. And so I do come back and forth about every 4 to 6 weeks. And it's just really nice to be able to come back and meet up with folks here and get business done here along with my boss. So I do it quite a bit.
What advice would you offer to young people, college students, let's say, who want to follow your path and get involved in politics or work on Capitol Hill in Congress?
Sure. I think it's really important to know that you can do this. Like I said, I had never been to Washington. The Fund for American Studies internship program came to me, and in college as the first person in my family to go. And like I said, it changed the trajectory of my life, my career, how I met my husband, all of these things. And so I really think that if you put your mind to it, it's definitely worthwhile. And it's important work that we do in Washington. If you want to work on Capitol Hill, our country is in need of people that are willing to do the hard work, have the grit, and fight for what's right and the liberties that we need to hold dear and continue to hold dear, and make sure that we get our country on the path that ensures everybody has the success that we're looking for. So I really think that if it's something that you're passionate about, feel free to find me. You can find me on my email, Desiree.Koetzle@mail.house.gov. I love to talk with students. We host TFAS interns in our office, and I just think it's so important to make sure that people know that they're needed. I need staff up there, and we need future leaders to make sure that this country can continue to thrive like it has been for so long. And I think it's really important that we continue to invest in young people, and I'm here to help if I can any more than we are. So,
well, you've been great, Desiree, as a TFAS alum, not only hosting the interns in your office, which is a wonderful opportunity, and many of our interns do like to work on Capitol Hill, but you've also been generous as a supporter of scholarship funds for students, and we rely on alumni to give back through our scholarship funds, and you've done so generously. I'm very appreciative of that. It's important to us because students come to us with financial need, and they wouldn't be able to attend a program without a scholarship often. So thank you for that. Would you consider yourself optimistic about the future? Do you think, where the country can kind of heal the division perhaps and grapple with the serious problems we face, and that the rising generations are up to the challenge, and the future is going to be bright for our republic for years to come, and the American experiment will continue successfully?
well, as somebody who's a grandfather and somebody who has young children myself, I think the only choice we have is to be optimistic. I think our children need to count on that from us. And I'm also a realist, and I think that we need to make sure that we're changing the way we're doing business, whether it's, the extraordinary debt that we're building for our children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren at this point. We need to get that under control. But there are definitely things that Republicans in just a couple of weeks can start doing to change the course of this country. And I remain hopeful and optimistic that ultimately our best days are ahead of us. We have been blessed to be born in the greatest nation on earth. And I think that we need to keep reminding our kids and your grandchildren that even if they're told that this country is awful in so many ways, that it truly is an amazing place to be and to be born and to grow up in and to work in. And we need to make sure that we continue to be that country.
Well, good. I know one thing that's divided the two of us is our football loyalties, you being a Vikings fan and me being a Packer fan. This is one season in many that you can finally show you that
Finally,
it's your Vikings are finally ahead of the Packers and having a great season. They had a great comeback recently, the biggest comeback in NFL history. Do you find time to
right.
get to any Vikings games?
We haven't. Our cabin is 3.5, 4 hours north of the Twin Cities, so I don't. But I would love to someday. I had one of our staffers went to the game, and he's a huge football fan, so he enjoyed it thoroughly. You'll enjoy this. My boys have been Packers fans because they always used to beat the Vikings, but now they're now switching over to be Vikings. Very fair weather fans that they are, but they've enjoyed watching the games on TV throughout the season for the Vikings. So hopefully our luck continues. I'm not going to hold my breath though.
Well, one question I have about your district, and you mentioned living on a lake, having a place on a lake up there. It's beautiful country in the North Woods. Does the lake warm up enough to do water sports in the summer and swim in it, or does it stay cold all year?
Yes, even if we have friends from Washington, D.C., they might think it's a little cold. I think we definitely enjoy the summer months up here. Take the fishing boat out, take a boat out and go swimming. The deepest part of the lake, I think, is only about 75 feet. So, I mean, it's the fourth largest lake in the state. So it's quite large and very picturesque, about 365 islands. It's gorgeous. And it just touches the Boundary Waters canoe area as well. So it's just very idyllic in terms of the scenery. But we love it. We love to go fishing, boating, and just enjoying the loons out on the lake late in the evening. It's wonderful and very peaceful. So I'm very thankful that we have it. And you have to come up here sometime.
Yeah, I would love to. Desiree Koetzle, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, to discuss some of the issues facing the new Congress, and to hear about how your TFAS experience has shaped your career. We're so grateful to call you and proud to call you an alum. So I wish you the very best as the new year rolls out in the coming months.
Well, thank you so much, Roger. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and Merry Christmas, and I hope to see you soon, and go Vikings.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Liberty and Leadership Podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe, download, like, or share the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you like this episode, I ask you to rate and review it. And if you have a comment or question for the show, please drop us an email at podcast@tfas.org. The Liberty and Leadership Podcast is produced at K Global Studios in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Roger Ream, and until next time, show courage in things large and small.